Production support for InFocus is provided by Smithville, a locally owned business serving central and southern Indiana since 1922, with residential business internet, voice, and security services. Smithville, local pride, global technology. Information at smithville.net. The Herald Times featuring Hotline, every weekday where reporter Marcy Krebs answers your questions about local oddities and curiosities, online at heraldtimes.com. Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for central and southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Today, trail systems are doing more than just giving Hoosiers a place to walk or ride their bike. They're connecting community destinations, schools, recreation facilities, and cultural and historical sites. But not every community has the desire or the money to improve its trails. Tonight, we'll discuss trail systems across South Central Indiana and the impact they have on local economies as we put trails in focus. And thanks for joining us for this edition of In Focus. I'm Stan Jastrzebski. If you have questions for one of our studio experts during tonight's program, please email them to us at infocus@indiana.edu, or you can always go to our website, indianapublicmedia.org/infocus, and leave comments there. Well, some Hoosiers commute to work in their cars or in buses. Some communities are suggesting that more of their residents use their feet or their bicycles. As WTIU's Alex Roy reports, trail travel is becoming an increasingly attractive option, but they are not popping up everywhere.
Mike Kutzko gets a lot of exercise as a Columbus firefighter, but it wasn't until he started commuting to work every day, year-round via bicycle, that he really noticed a difference in his health.
I've felt so much better since I've been riding, and I've been riding here consistently for probably the last 4 or 5 years. Hardly ever get sick anymore, other than, you know, your lucky Indiana seasonal allergies.
The People's Pathway is a paved trail that circles the city of Columbus. The first parts of the path were built in 1983 after a group of community members pressed local government for its creation.
I always refer to it as kind of the I-465 of people trails. So that's sort of the goal, is to have a loop so that, and feeders that come into that loop, similar to what you'd see around Indianapolis with the highway, so that no matter where you are in the county or even outside the county, you can link into our people trail system and get anywhere in Columbus.
For many Hoosiers, though, a quick commute on a local trail isn't a viable option.
For a city the size of ours to have almost 20 miles of people trails in a community is very unusual. You have to go up to Indianapolis to the Monon Trail to see a trail system that's comparable to ours.
Though funded mostly by state and federal grants, the city was required to provide a local match.
This section of trail, for instance, the Hog Creek Trail, was about a $1 million operation. Our share of it was $250,000, which we raised locally through various means, various donations, a big fundraising campaign as well.
In Bloomington, the Parks Foundation has helped raise large amounts of money to beautify the Beeline Trail and has accepted planters, benches, picnic tables, and artwork as donations.
That is about, for the Beeline, about $100,000 has come in to enhance this trail and make it even better for the benefit of the community.
But it's not only the people using the trails who are profiting.
There is research and documentation that shows that there is an economic benefit from trails. Businesses locating near trails. People make purchasing choices based on being on the trail. You buy something from a restaurant, you stop in at a shop.
Further south, on the old CSX Railroad property, Bloomington is developing what will be one of its biggest parks yet. The Beeline Trail will take people directly there. In 2006, Governor Mitch Daniels doubled state funding for trails from $10 million to $20 million and pledged to have every Hoosier living within 7.5 miles or 15 minutes of a trail within a decade. But recent budget woes have rendered that future uncertain. With nearly 2,000 miles of trail laid across the state, Mike Kutzko says it's still tough to try and convince people to use them.
I'm working on that. It's still a hard idea to, you know, a lot of people I work with may live out of town, and it's, you know, it's not as convenient as it is for me. But I just enjoy riding.
We'll take a look at the road ahead for people and pathways as we put trails in focus.
And joining me this evening is my co-host, Sarah Whitmire. Sarah, tell us a little bit about who you'll be speaking with.
Thanks, Dan. Coming up, we'll talk to Eric Oberg. He's a development officer with the Midwest Rails to Trails Conservancy. So we'll have that conversation in just a bit. For now, back to you, Stan.
Thanks, Sarah. And joining us here in the WTIU studios tonight, our City of Bloomington Parks and Recreation Director, Mick Reneisen, Director of Outdoor Recreation with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, Steve Morris, and Jeff Bransford, who's the Associate Director at the Epley Institute for Parks and Public Lands. I want to get a thought from each of you, and Jeff, we'll start with you on this first one. I think when people think of trails, they think of this place where you can exercise, you can run, you can ride your bike. I wonder if you think people have almost too narrow a definition of what trails can do and what they can even do for the community around them.
Well, you're right. Trails have been proven to have several different benefits to the community, and recreation is just one of those aspects. And as we just saw in the segment, a lot of people use that for health and other wellness sorts of activities. But in addition to that, they've been proven to stimulate economies by allowing areas for there to be increased public access to businesses and other special events. And especially here in Bloomington with the Beeline Trail, that's proven especially valuable with the farmers market and some of the other activities that they have in close proximity to the trail and at hub areas.
Steve, your thoughts are, your group helps to maintain and oversee the trails in Indiana. Are you seeing that people are thinking of trails as broadly as they should?
Well, I think it depends on where you're at. In a place like Indianapolis, where there's a pretty strong trail system, and like there is here in Bloomington, you're beginning to see people more and more out to improve their health, not just for what we thought we were going to develop them for was recreation, but we're seeing that more and more people are looking to these trails to improve their health. And at the same time, beginning to see that they can use these trails to get places that they need to go. You know, get to work, get to school, get to shopping. And so they're seeing these as modes of alternative transportation as well.
That's an interesting point, and that's something we actually came across in researching this show. And Mick, I wonder if people come up to you and say the same thing that they said to Alex Roy when he was out doing our story. He went out on a Saturday to the farmer's market and saw a family come up to him on a series of bicycles, and they had no idea what the farmer's market was, but they'd just come down the Beeline Trail, and all of a sudden they were, and they had not only used it as a transportation means, but they'd also used it as a way to get more in touch with their community. Are you seeing people who are still surprised to find the Beeline Trail as complete as it is?
Well, that, and I think that we also see this connection of people on trails that you might not have had this amenity not have been provided so that people can interact with their neighbors. Sometimes we don't even know who lives next to us, or in the Beeline's case, businesses that are located next to the trail. And as people have matriculated up and down the trail system, they've learned that there are a whole lot of different people using the trails. There are a lot of business opportunities. There are property values that are increasing, and there's just this interconnection that I think is integral to life, is to have some connection with people, and the trail systems we've seen provide that extra benefit.
Steve and then Jeff, the next question is for you. You heard in our open that Mitch Daniels a few years ago doubled the budget for trails and said he wanted everybody in Indiana to be living within close proximity to them within a short period of time. I have to say I went to a number of meetings at the State House this year. Trails didn't come up ever, as far as I can tell. Have we been forced to put trails on the back burner as far as their priority in Indiana?
We have not. The opposite is actually true. Trail development has really ramped up over the past couple of years. It's maybe been a little bit out of the limelight, but funding was increased, doubled, as the governor said he would do. And in fact, in some years it was maybe tripled or even more than that. A lot of that was the result of federal stimulus funding that became available. The object was to have, the ultimate goal of our trails plan was to have a trail within 7.5 miles or 15 minutes of every Hoosier resident, and we are now at about 96% of that goal. So we're getting very close to actually accomplishing that goal.
So now let me ask the follow-up question to Jeff. Are people using those trails now that 96% of people are near them?
I believe so, or at least they say they are. When we do projects out in different communities in Indiana and talk about the recreation facilities and amenities that are most important to them, trails almost always come up as one of the most popular facilities that a city can have. And when we talk about the different uses that, that residents engage in through biking, through hiking, through running or walking, trails are always the most popular. And we've seen the use of trails increase quite a bit over the last 10 years or so. Again, as more people are trying to lead a healthy lifestyle or find alternative ways of transportation, they get out there and they use the trails more and more.
All right, I want to get back to this in just 1 minute, but we have to go over to Sarah Whitmire in the WFIU studios with her guest. Sarah?
Thanks, Stan. Joining me on the phone now is Eric Oberg from the Midwest Rails to Trails Conservancy. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I want to start talking about just how do you work with communities if they want to convert an old railway into a trail system?
Nick, I'll start with you and we go down the line.
Well, it seems it seems to follow the same script. We get calls from all over the Midwest. We're Rails to Trails Conservancy is a national nonprofit. Our Midwest office here works in 7 upper Midwest states, and we get calls from large cities like Indianapolis to small towns, you name it, and it's usually a city council, a chamber of commerce, a group of citizen activists that have this great idea. They've been to places like Bloomington, like Indianapolis, places that have great trails, and they say, hey, we want that in our community. And so they look us up, they give us a call, we come out and do presentations, whether it's at their city council meetings or they'll just have a special public meeting one evening in their town hall, and we'll come give PowerPoint presentations, kind of show them what these look like, walk them through the process a little bit, and then try to just help them along the way.
So say you're successful and you help develop a trail in a community. Who then owns the trail when you're finished?
It's a local ownership issue. Now, there's so many different ownership structures. It can be owned by a local park district, whether it's a city park, county parks. Some long-distance trails that cross multiple jurisdictions are state parks. There's quite a few instances of state parks taking over long trails that go through multiple counties and multiple jurisdictions. But it's typically some sort of public parks ownership. That's the usual end game for these trails.
And they handle the maintenance, the upkeep, then?
Exactly, they do. And there's plenty of instances as well where the park district may be the official owner and manager, but there's great friends groups that pop up that help get these established, help get them built, and then especially over the last 3, 4, 5 years with some of the budget issues that local and state agencies have come under, these friends groups are really becoming more and more important because they can rally local folks that are willing to go out and do some of the maintenance, maybe do some citizen patrolling and things like that along the trails. So a lot of these friends groups are really helping out public agencies to allow some of this to keep going as budgets are getting strained more and more. So those things are really taking off.
Now, some of these trails do receive federal funding, but we know there have been stories of politicians seeking to remove federal funding from these trails and pedestrian and walkway systems. To what extent are they funded federally?
Well, the vast majority of trails get some federal funding. Most of that is funneled through state DOTs and DNRs. I mean, by far the largest pool of money is the Transportation Enhancement Fund, which is administered through Department of Transportations around the country. Recreational trail funds are usually DNR administered. The Safe Routes to School program is another one that has really helped in the last 6 or so years get trails on the ground. But as most people in the trail community know, we are now working on more than 2 years since the last surface transportation bill expired. We've been working on continuing resolutions. Just this past week, the Senate has dropped an outline for their new surface transportation bill. The House of Representatives, Chairman Micah from Florida, just dropped his bill almost 2 weeks ago. We haven't, the Senate bill is not completely written, the House bill is, and it completely takes out all federal funding, all dedicated federal funding. So that's something that our organization, along with our other national partners, are working pretty hard on right now. We have a lot of faith in the Senate that they're going to be fighting for these programs, and in reconciliation we'll see funding upheld, but there's certainly an attack on trail and alternative transportation funding happening right now.
Now, when you're talking about the same transportation dollars that can go into funding roadways, how do you convince politicians such as Senator Mica in Florida that it's worth investing in trails?
Sure. Well, we've spent quite a few years. We've spent the last 4 years as an organization. This has been one of our #1 priorities. We've put a lot of time and resources into gearing up for this fight. We knew it was going to be a fight. And we put together a lot of resources. We worked with a lot of people from all over the country. We worked with folks out of Indianapolis very, very closely. We worked with people all over the place to show why it's important. We created a report about 2 years ago called Active Transportation for America. It's really the first nationwide report that put quantifying data showing what the return on investment for active transportation has been. In your conversation before I came on, I know there was a little bit of talk about economic impacts of trails. We've quantified that as much as we can. We also do individual trail economic impact studies around the country to just show how much money is coming in from these. And then then it gets very easy when you take these and you can show that a trail has a payback in 2 years. You know, the development cost of a trail has an economic impact payback in 2 years of the entire construction cost. And you just ask them, show me another transportation project that has a return on investment that quickly, and they can't. We've also had a huge effort in Congressman Mica's home district. We've got dozens of letters of resolution. We've got resolutions passed by local townships and cities. We've had mayors sign letters. His own home constituents now have sent dozens of letters through Rails to Trails Conservancy, saying that they want dedicated funding preserved, that they don't agree with his plan. So, when you get to a local level, people get it. It seems that transferring that to the national level is where the disconnect is. So, instead of us going in, we're making sure all our local partners who are their constituents are getting to them, saying, no, this is important. This is part of our economic engine. This is part of what's going to take us out of the problems we're in now. Okay. Cutting it is the worst thing we can do. So,
well, Eric, unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but thank you so much for joining us. Back to you, Stan.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm glad Eric mentioned at the end there the whole idea of economic development, because I wanted to touch on that. And Mick, we'll start with you. He said there have been a number of studies done that show that trails are this economic driver, that investment comes back to a city in a short period of time. And my question on these studies is always, how accurate can they be? Because you take into a lot of account of things that you are guessing to be true, but you're not 100% sure are true. What do you see, for instance, in Bloomington in terms of the studies that you're privy to?
Property values go up around the trail from the previous value that was documented before the trails went in to post-trail development. You see that the value of the properties, the sale prices go up. You see reinvestment in retail and housing product and business development, and that generates economic impact for the community in a lot of different ways. Tourism can increase. Hard to pin that all on trail development, but it's one of the many mechanisms that we would argue makes our community a better place to visit, where we hope that the visitors spend some money while they're here. And to Eric's point about the local people get it and understand the value of trails and how can we get that nationally, our department in Bloomington does a survey every 5 years, a statistically valid survey of our community. And in each of the 2 last cycles of 5-year surveys, the #1 amenity that our citizens said they wanted was walking and biking trails. Hence the reason we've been actively building so many trails. It's not even a close second. Anything else that ranks on those surveys is far below walking and biking trails. So the #1 form of exercise for most people is walking and biking for pleasure, and hence the reason for the interest in development of trails. The other economic thing that I would point out is we had a person who had some property in a rural section of town when we created one of our first trail systems in Bloomington called the Clear Creek Trail, and he was very resistant to selling his property, and once the property was acquired, he was resistant and concerned about what negative impacts it would have on his property value. 2 years after the trail was developed, he sold all of his land around it and was a millionaire and retired.
I wanted to get to sort of the side that we're not sure of yet about trails, which is what they can do for the state going forward. Indiana, let's face it, is a state that is known as having an overweight population, having air quality that's not the best in a number of places. Can trails help to mitigate the public health problems that Indiana has been so maligned for, especially in the last decade? Steve, your thoughts?
Now, there's a vein of thought in the trails community that if you build a trail, people will come to use them. And it's been my experience that I see that's actually true in a lot of places. However, there have been studies that show that just building a trail doesn't necessarily mean people will come out to use them. A lot of times people don't know where the trails are at and those kinds of things. That's why we've established what we call our Indiana Trails Inventory at the state level. And we document all of the trails around the state and post them on a website so that people can go in there and see where they live, see what trails are nearby, find out more information about those trails, and thereby get out and use them.
Jeff, I think Steve brings up an interesting point, which is access to these trails. What does your group find out about people's access to it in terms of both ease and understanding of access, and then understanding where they can go and how they can best make use of the actual span that they're about to cover on a trail?
Sure. One of the first steps that we take, or one of the first things that we find out when we interact with the community and work with them on trail plans, is that we need to broaden, oftentimes, the understanding and the conception of what a trail is. For some people, a trail is just a dirt path in the middle of the woods, or it's a busy place in a downtown area. But trails can be very diverse, and even a single trail can have several different characteristics to it. And so in terms of access, helping people understand that they may have access to a trail in their downtown area, or they may have access to a trail in their neighborhood, or even in a park that they go to out of town. And as Mick referenced earlier, trails bring people together, and it brings nature together and brings a host of other interests. So once we broaden that understanding and get to the point where they understand, where people understand all the multiple uses that trails can either provide or provide a gateway to, we usually see increased interest.
I'm glad you brought up the point about trails bringing people together. There are certainly good points to that, and there are certainly some somewhat scarier points to that. I'd like to start with Mick and go down the line and get a thought from each of you on the idea of keeping trails safe, especially where the Monon Trail in Indianapolis is concerned. There have been a number of somewhat high-profile violent crimes in the last year or two that have gotten a lot of media coverage, to the point where Indianapolis police officers, I think maybe even the chief, went on a bike ride on the trail earlier this year just to show people that they can be reassured that it is safe for them to be using these trails. Let's start in Bloomington. What does the city of Bloomington do to keep these trails safe? Because let's face it, some of them are in rural areas. They're away from where people and especially police officers might be. It's got to be a challenge.
It is, but first I'd say that it's uncharacteristically unfair to label a trail any more unsafe than a sidewalk, a street, or any other place people congregate or go from point A to point B. There's no statistics that prove that there's more crime or vandalism or anything else on a trail than there is anywhere else. It's just become a high focus of interest. What are we doing locally? We have Segway police, we have bicycle police, we have a little ATV presence on our trail system, we have lights on some segments of the trail. All of those things are great deterrents, but the best deterrent is use. The more people on a trail system, the less likely that anyone's going to attempt to do something that would cause harm or vandalize or do anything else negative on the trail. So we tell our users, you know, use common sense. Go with a buddy, go with a friend, go when the trail is actively in use. Don't go in the darkest, most unlit, most hidden place by yourself at the wrong time of day. And I think that's common sense people would use if they were walking downtown in any of our communities at a certain time of day or a certain time of night.
Steve, you said people are still trying to learn how best to use some trails as they are being expanded into more rural areas of the state. Is there enough use in these communities where trails are a new thing, that there is that sort of people presence that can help assist law enforcement to keep these trails safe, so you don't end up with the sort of media coverage that we've seen in Indianapolis over the last year?
Right. With a lot of these areas, a lot of them were abandoned railroad corridors, and they were places where people would hang out and either use them as dumping grounds or places to do illicit things. And Now that we're putting trails in some of these areas, we're starting to see that having people out there using them for a recreational basis or whatever, transportation, that crime actually has gone down along these corridors. We have had some studies showing that.
Jeff, I wonder if your group has come up with or talked to people who have developed somewhat innovative ways to see that this sort of synergy exists, where you have a lot of people who try to use the trails, and at the same time you try to ensure that safety is paramount as well as use.
Well, one of the ways that we've done that in some communities is not just by encouraging use of the trail directly, but by helping the department or organization that is affiliated with the trail build partnerships in the community. And through that, through understanding the purpose of the trail and the location of the trail and all of the events and activities that can take place, it raises community awareness in general.
Give me just, in closing here, 15 seconds from each of you, and Mick, we'll start with you and go down the line. Give me either a big challenge that you think is facing trails or a positive step that you think that cities or people could take to see that they get more use going forward.
Well, the big challenge will be funding, as has been stated by everyone on the panel, including Eric on the phone interview. If federal funding dries up, it will become much more difficult to continue the momentum. However, on a positive side, as these trail systems have been built and are used by local citizens and citizens from all over our state and in the country, I would guess that the local politicians and our state folks that represent us will also see the importance that's placed back in their districts, and hopefully that funding will either be maintained or increased. And then the other big challenge, I think, is connecting everything, connecting the dots. The trail legs get built in certain ways and they're planned, but sometimes it's like a sidewalk that stops and you wonder where it's going to continue, and we'd like to make sure those connections continue.
All right, I apologize, but they're telling me we've run out of time, but my thanks to Mick and to Steve and to Jeff for being here. My thanks also to my co-host this evening, Sarah Whitmire. Sarah, thanks so much.
Thanks, Stan. That
is our show for tonight. Thanks to you for watching and listening, and please do visit our website. That is indianapublicmedia.org/infocus. You can send emails for next month's program to infocus@indiana.edu, and you can see portions of this show by visiting the website. Please do join us next month when our topic is education. Have a nice night.
Production support for InFocus is provided by Smithville, a locally owned business serving central and southern Indiana since 1922. With residential business internet, voice, and security services. Smithville, local pride, global technology. Information at smithville.net. The Herald Times featuring Hotline, every weekday where reporter Marcy Krebs answers your questions about local oddities and curiosities. Online at heraldtimes.com. Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for central and southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you.